More than a dozen police staff are under investigation for passing sensitive information to the private investigators, Thompson and Clark, outside of official channels. The police did their own parallel investigation into the use of security firms and found no evidence they were using private investigators for surveillance, no evidence of criminal or corrupt behaviour by police staff. So I asked Deputy Commissioner Mike Clement about the actions of individual police officers who were passing unauthorised information to Thompson and Clark.
There was 19 officers or people involved who are employed by police and 20 occasions that we've sort of got our eyes over in terms of making sure that we're 100% sure that if there was doubt involved that we're going to address that. So there's still work to do with regard to the detail of that, but we've got enough concern at first glance to say, let's have another look at it.
Yeah, at first glance it appears that they were passing on information that they shouldn't have been. So what exactly were they passing on? Give me some examples.
Well, so what happens is Thompson and Clark or other security consultants or anybody for that matter, but if they have a request of police, we've got to look at all of those 20,000 a year Official Information Act requests and say, on the basis of the principles of the Act, should we respond? So that's what Thompson and Clark did, and what we should do is, against the principles in the Act, disclose or not disclose. And when we've looked at these instances, what we've said is that we think that maybe they've gone too far in terms of the information that's been provided, or we want to know more information before we're
Deputy Commissioner, I am sorry to interrupt you, but the reality is here, you have identified a number of occasions, forget the Official Information Act, you have identified a number of occasions where you believe that information was passed inappropriately to a private commercial operation, namely Thompson and Clark. What are examples of the information that was passed on in those circumstances?
Well, they might be typically undertaking an investigation on behalf of a private organisation, for example. And I can't I mean, I know you want me to, but I can't disregard the Official Information Act. So they're entitled, just like anybody else is, to make an inquiry of police with regard to information we hold. So against the principles in the Act, because I do have to keep bringing it back to that, because that's where the shortcomings are identified, is that against the principles in the Act, then we have to exercise care with regard to what we provide them back.
And I understand that. I understand how you apply the Official Information Act. I'm asking for examples where you think they acted outside of policy and principle. So I can read the list if you won't give me examples. So a burglary victim's details were passed on to Thompson and Clark with the suggestion that Thompson and Clark could provide security for that person. The names of alleged youth offenders were passed on with apparently no consideration given to their vulnerability. What other things were passed on?
Well, they are good examples. I mean, it's on the report and it's on the website. I'm not trying to withhold anything from anybody. I'm just saying the reality is they've asked for information about an investigation they're conducting on behalf of a third party. They come to us for information that we might hold that might assist that investigation, and we should provide the information on that basis. So you rightly point out in that case is that the victim's details were provided on the basis that TCIL might be able to offer security advice to that victim. We would argue, and that's subject to further exploration, that that's excessive in terms of what our obligations were.
Well, doesn't it actually seem a bit crass?
Well, at the end of the day, I guess what I trust is people's intent. So if somebody was intent on making sure a victim was safe, what I want to believe is they provided the details on the basis that they thought that TCIL might better help them keep safe. The reality is that was an extension over and above what the requirements of the Act are on police with regard to the provision of information. So they are the types of incidents that we've got concern about, and which we will make sure in future we exercise more care about in terms of providing information.
The thing is, well, I'm wondering why, because people listening to this will think, hey, Thompson and Clark were getting stellar, top-shelf, gold star treatment from the police. Why? Do you treat other security firms the same as you were treating this one?
Well, as I said earlier, we do about at least 20,000 Official Information Act requests a year. So there's a myriad of requests coming to us, including from media, actually. But I mean,
but were there other security companies identified? Were there other companies identified where you inappropriately gave them information, or just Thompson and Clark?
There are a myriad of security companies who inquire of police every day. For instance, insurance security.
But that's not my question. My question is, Thompson and Clark, you found a number of times where it's questionable actions of police officers giving information to Thompson and Clark. Was there any other investigations company that you also found was getting information inappropriately from the police, or was it just Thompson and Clark?
In this investigation, just Thompson and Clark.
Right. Okay. So Thompson and Clark, aren't some of them old police officers?
Yes, they are.
Okay. So does that explain the relationship and the free flow of information?
Well, I hope not, but I mean, the reality, you asked the question, I don't have the answer. The bottom line is that they used to be police officers, and so are a lot of other security companies populated by ex-police officers, because it's a skill set, I guess, that you can transfer from police into the wider world. When they leave police, they may indeed, because of their skill set, go and work in security companies, and they may go and work in investigations and intelligence and other government agencies as well. It's one of those things that we can't be in denial about. They've gathered those skills through policing. What we're saying to our people is, regardless of whether the fact that they used to be in police, you've got to keep your professional distance. I mean, you can't unknow these people if they've gone out into the big wide world, but you've got to maintain a professional distance when it comes to your interactions with them for the very reason we're talking about. Well, so it's absolutely going to be the message back to our people, is that you must exercise care with regard to those relationships that existed, but now they're on a different footing.
Well, the other thing is the report identifies perhaps inappropriately close relationships. Morning teas paid for by Thompson and Clark, invitations to go out for drinks that were quote-unquote meetings in pubs. Is any of that appropriate?
Well, there's a line to be drawn. If the meeting is as a consequence of their formal business and engagement with police, then the answer is no. But if we're asking people to sever ties from, long-standing relationships, then I would say that's probably a bridge too far. But it's bring you back to the comment that I made, is that our people have to exercise caution for this very reason, because the perception, if not the reality, is clear for all to see, is that the engagement or the nature of the engagement might be seen to be inappropriate, and we have to be extremely careful of that.
How do you
think...
the
point that's made in the investigation, and we'll be reminding our people of that. It's a constant. People have to be on their guard.
So how do you think this looks to the public? How do you seriously think it looks to members of the public listening to this?
Well, I'll just come back to the scope of the investigation. It's a 15-year period. It's 16 occasions on which we've got the reason to inquire further. So on its face, is it massive? No, it's not. Is it criminal or corrupt? No, it's not. Were they tasked by us or directed by us, as in TCIL? No, they weren't. And the vast majority was consistent. So I think we've got some areas of concern that we want to delve further into, but I think perspective is everything.
Is it just a dodgy old boys club? Is that the problem here?
Well, I think I'll come back to what I said earlier, is that people, you can't unknow people, you can't sort of disassociate from long-standing relationships, and our job as an executive, mine as the Deputy Commissioner of National Operations, will be
but the police need to be
people
above reproach, don't they? That's the whole point. There's a higher standard. You're in uniform, you're sworn officers, people have higher expectations, and, well, would you think that you've met them with this?
Well, what you've just said is exactly right. We pride ourselves on exactly that. That is the message that we constantly give. You cannot allow the door to be opened with regard to criticism about the way in which we engage with people outside of New Zealand Police. But at the same time, you've got to be human. I mean, we are human. You cannot unknow people. They might have long-standing associations, and our people just have to have the wherewithal to manage both.
Okay.
That they can still be friends, but they've got to have a professional distance when it comes to the business.
I notice in your report there is a clause in there that says it's recommended that a public-facing version of this report with appropriate redactions be disseminated by publication on the New Zealand Police website. What's a public-facing report? Is that a watered-down version?
No, because ironically, we've actually got obligations under the Privacy Act and Official Information Act to preserve the principles in both. And
that is kind of ironic, isn't it?
Yes, well, it's not lost on me, and I know you're going to make a point of it, so I might as well get it out there. The bottom line is that that's the approach that we like to think that we take each and every time. This report has reminded us that we've got to be vigilant all of the time.
And that was Deputy Commissioner Mike Clement.